Good morning. We read today chapter 27 of Richard Sibbes' The Bruised Reed. We'll be back, Lord willing, tomorrow to read the 28th and final chapter, so we're down to our final two chapters in this classic work. Today's chapter is Victory Not to be Had Without Fighting, chapter 27. The sixth conclusion is that this prevailing government shall not be without fighting. There can be no victory where there is no combat. In Isaiah it is said, he shall bring judgment in truth. Here it is said, he shall bring judgment unto victory. The word send forth has a stronger sense in the original, to send forth with force, to show that where his government is in truth, it will be opposed until he getteth the upper hand. Nothing is so opposed to Christ as Christ and his government, both within us and without us. And within us, most in our conversion, though corruption prevails not so far as to make void the powerful work of grace. Yet there is not only a possibility of opposing, but a proneness to oppose. And not only a proneness, but an actual withstanding the working of Christ's Spirit. And that in every action, but yet no prevailing resistance so far as to make void the work of grace, but corruption in the issue yields to grace. There is much ado to bring Christ into the heart, and to set a tribunal for him to judge there. There is an army of lust and mutiny against him. The utmost strength of most men's endeavors and parts is to keep Christ from ruling in the soul. The flesh still laboreth to maintain its own regency, and therefore it cries down the credit of whatsoever crosseth it, as God's blessed ordinances, etc., and highly prizes anything, though never so dead and empty, if it give way to the liberty of the flesh. And no marvel if the spiritual government of Christ be so opposed, because it is government, and that limits the course of the will and casts a bridle upon its wanderings. Everything natural resists what opposes it. So corrupt will labors to bear down all laws, and counteth it a generous thing not to be awed, and an argument of low spirit to fear any, even God himself, until unavoidable danger seizeth on men, and then those that feared least out of danger fear most in danger, as we see in Belshazzar in Daniel 5:6. It is spiritual government, and therefore the less the flesh will endure it. Christ's government bringeth the very thoughts and desires which are the most immediate and free issue of the soul into obedience. Though a man were of so composed a carriage that his whole life were free from outward offensive breaches, yet with Christ to be carnally or worldly minded is death. Romans 8:6. He looketh on a worldly mind with greater detestation than any one particular offense. But Christ's Spirit is in those who are in some degree earthly minded. Truth it is, but not as an allower and maintainer, but as an opposer, subduer, and in the end, a conqueror. Carnal men would fain bring Christ and the flesh together, and could be content with some reservation to submit to Christ. But Christ will be no underling to any base affection, and therefore, where there is allowance of ourselves in any sinful lust, it is a sign the keys were never given up to Christ to rule us. Again, this judgment is opposed because it is judgment, and men love not to be judged and censured. Now Christ in his truth arraigneth them, giveth sentence against them, and bindeth them over to the latter judgment of the great day. And therefore they take upon them to judge that truth that must judge them. But truth will be too good for them. Man hath a day now, which St. Paul calls man's day, 1 Corinthians 4:33, wherein he getteth upon his bench and usurps a judgment over Christ in his ways. But God hath a day where he will set all straight, and his judgment shall stand. And the saints shall have their time, when they shall sit in judgment upon that throne, upon that judge them now. In the meantime, Christ will rule in the hearts of his enemies, even in the midst of our hearts. Use. It is therefore no sign of a good condition to find all quiet and nothing at odds. For can we think that corruption, which is the elder in us, and Satan, the strong man that keepeth many holds in us, will yield possession quietly? No. There is not so much as a thought of goodness discovered by him, but he joineth with corruption to kill it in the birth. And as Pharaoh's cruelty was especially against the male children, so Satan's malice is especially against the most religious and manly resolutions. This then we are always to expect, that wheresoever Christ cometh, there will be opposition. When Christ was born, all Jerusalem was troubled. So when Christ is born in any man, the soul is in an uproar, and all because the heart is unwilling to yield itself up to Christ to rule it. Wheresoever Christ cometh, he breedeth division, not only between man and himself, but between man and man, between church and church, of which disturbance Christ is no more the cause than physic is of trouble in a distempered body, of which noisome humors are the proper cause. For the end of physic is the peace of humors. But Christ thinketh it fit that the thoughts of men's hearts should be discovered, and he is well for the falling as the rising of many in Israel. Thus the desperate madness of men is laid open, that they had rather be under the guidance of their own lust, and by consequence of Satan himself, to their endless destruction, than to put their feet into Christ's fetters and their necks under his yoke. Whereas indeed Christ's service is the only true liberty. His yoke is an easy yoke, his burden but as the burden of wings to a bird, that maketh her fly the higher. Satan's government is rather a bondage than a government, unto which Christ giveth up those that shake off his own. For then he giveth Satan and his followers power, and his factors power over them, since they will not receive the truth in love. Take him, Jesuit, take him, Satan, blind him and bind him and lead him to perdition. Those that take the most liberty to sin are the most perfect slaves, because most voluntary slaves. The will in everything is either the best or the worst. The further men go on in a willful course, the deeper they sink in rebellion. And the more they cross Christ, doing what they will, the more they shall one day suffer what they would not. In the meantime, they are prisoners in their own souls, bound over their consciences to the judgment of him after death, whose judgment they would none of their lives. And is it not equal that they should feel him a severe judge to condemn them, whom they would not have a mild judge to rule them? This chapter is sobering to me because it again affirms the stubborn nature of our hearts, even as believers, that there's still much in us that resists and pushes against the rule of Christ in our lives. And I know that's true in many of us, and maybe not across the board in every area, but in some certain areas of our lives, we've not yielded. So today's an encouragement to us to seek, by God's grace, to yield all areas of our life to his lordship, and not go on in a way of rebellion, but to go on in a way of submission. And in doing that, we honor Jesus, and we'll find greater peace and strength in our lives and greater usefulness in God's kingdom. So we wrap up tomorrow with the conclusion of this victorious kingdom, the bruised reed, the smoking flax. God will not break, he will not put out, he will raise up and help us to grow and bring us to glory and ultimately to victory. So if you don't feel victorious now, that victory is coming if we hold on and trust in Jesus. So I hope you have a great day today.